Welcome to Salvation by Grace, a broadcast ministry of Grace Christian Assembly, a Sovereign Grace Fellowship in Smyrna, Tennessee. For more information, we invite you to visit our website at www.salvationbygrace.org. Now let's join our teacher, Jim McClarty.
Right. It's no problem. That's what we're here for, is to get this stuff out and clear up these things.
Okay, tell me if I'm jumping ahead.
Okay.
To add to her question, so the his would be people pre-Christ. What about those people?
No.
What about Adam to Jesus?
Okay. When Jesus was on the Mount of Transfiguration, Moses and Elijah showed up there with him, which means that Moses and Elijah were in an alive state. Okay. Up until the cross, we read about a place called Abraham's bosom, also referred to as Sheol in the Hebrew. And when Jesus tells the story of Lazarus and the rich man, that they died at the same time, and Lazarus was a humble man, the rich man had everything in this world, so they get to a place, they're still cognizant, they're still thinking, and the rich man says, dip your finger in water and give it to me that I can drink. And Lazarus says, there is a gulf between you and I can't get to you. And so the rich man says, well then, send someone back and tell my brothers, tell them not to come to this place, because it's a place of torment. So there's a gulf between this place of torment and this place called Abraham's bosom where Lazarus was, where there seemed to be water because he could dip his finger in the water and he was fine. That place was also called then in the Greek paradisio. We get the word paradise from it. So now, here's the question. When Jesus died and he had the thief on the cross, did he say to him, you'll be with me today in heaven? He said, no. He said, you'll be with me today in paradise. Jesus didn't go directly to heaven. He said he was going into the belly of the earth to free the captives, which is exactly what Isaiah said he would do. He would go and free the captives and take them out with him. So he went to paradise, spent 3 days in the belly of the earth. Then, when he resurrected, remember Mary and Martha came to him and he said, don't touch me. I haven't yet ascended to the Father. Where was he for those 3 days? He was in the bosom of Abraham, going and getting all the people you're asking about, the Old Testament saints. Then the book of Matthew says that when he resurrected, the graves in Jerusalem were open, and all these dead people walked and talked. Why? Well, because he resurrected those people. Who were they? Clearly Old Testament saints. They weren't New Testament saints. These were the people he had gone to paradise and gotten, that he'd gotten from Abraham's bosom. Where did those people go? The Bible doesn't tell us. But since they had been dead for hundreds and some thousands of years, I doubt that they died again. I think they went up with him, but the Bible doesn't tell us. It's just my opinion. Their bodies were sleeping in the grave. They were alive. The point of telling you about the conversation between Lazarus and the rich man is that they were cognizant, because he was asking about soul sleep. It's not that they were sleeping in their soul. Their bodies were in the grave and deteriorating, which is the whole point of Ezekiel 37 in the Valley of Dry Bones, is God saying, even though the bones are dry and they've been a long time dead, I can give them bodies. I can raise their bodies up out of the dust again. But they were in a cognizant state. When Jesus talked about Lazarus and the rich man, this is what some people don't get. He wasn't forming a parable. Whenever he told a parable, the writers always says, he gave them this parable. He posed this parable. In that case, Jesus doesn't do it. He just starts talking about it as a reality. This is what's going on. So since you have Elijah and Moses in a cognizant state, talking to him on the Mount of Transfiguration, since you have Lazarus and the rich man in a cognizant state, there's no hint or clue of soul sleep anywhere. Instead, what you have are holding places of cognizant being. The difference between that and purgatory is that purgatory exists for the purpose of you paying for your sins to get to heaven, whereas Sheol, the grave, is a holding place for the dead who are awaiting their ultimate judgment, which happens at the end of the 1,000 years. At the end of Revelation 20, it says, death, hell, and the grave, and the sea give up the dead that were in them. They all stand before the white throne. The books are open, and every man is tried according to his works. They're all found wanting, and they're cast into the lake of fire, which was prepared for the devil and his angels. That's the second resurrection, and it's also called the second death. But it happens at the end of the 1,000 years. At the beginning of the 1,000 years, there's a general resurrection of all those that belong to, it's Israel that's raised up for the 1,000-year kingdom. The church, meanwhile, is taken up, what we just read, taken up into the air, so shall we ever be with the Lord. So again, the folks who say, well, there's no, who get mad at me because I make a distinction between Israel and the church, they try to mix and match all that and somehow say that the resurrection at the beginning of the 1,000 years is the same as the resurrection of the church, and the church is taken up then because the church goes through them. They just have a real hard time making everything work because they won't see the distinction between the national kingdom that Christ is coming to establish and the church that he takes off the planet before he establishes the kingdom. But Paul says it so many times that unless you see it the way he does, first Christ resurrected, then the parousia for his own, where he takes them up off the planet, then comes the end when he will lay down all his enemies and establish his kingdom. That's the day of the Lord. But we're gone, taken up before the day of the Lord, which I will also prove to you out of 2 Thessalonians, but that's running too far ahead. There's a lot of information here about this. Every man will be in his own order. Christ is the first fruit. Afterward, they that are Christ at his appearing, the parousia. Then comes the end, when he shall have delivered up the kingdom to God, even the Father, when he shall have put down all rule and all authority and all power, for he must reign until he hath put his enemies under his feet. That's all that kingdom language, the day of the Lord language. That all happens after he has come for his own. Verse 26, the last enemy that shall be destroyed is death, for he has put all things under his feet. Now, when he says all things are put under his feet, it's manifest that he is accepted, which did put all things under him. That's a little theological parenthesis that Paul put in there that said God has put all things under Christ's feet. And then he said, now it's obvious, it's logical that if God put everything under Christ's feet, that God is not under Christ's feet, because he's the one who had the authority to put everything under Christ's feet. That's all Paul was getting at there. Verse 28, and when all things shall be subdued under Christ, then shall the Son also himself be subject unto him, God, that put all things under him, that God may be all and in all. Else, what shall they do which are baptized for the dead if the dead rise not at all? Why are they then baptized for the dead? Now, I hate to have to bog down in this for a second. He is talking here to Gentiles in Corinth who were baptizing for the dead, and he's arguing one thing only here, which is that resurrection is a valid concept. And so he's using their own mystery religion against them and saying, you even baptize for the dead. Why would you even bother doing that if they're not going to rise again? Why do you even do anything for the dead if they're just dead and gone? So he's using their own cultic tradition against them in the argument there. He is not advocating baptism for the dead, nor did Paul ever baptize for the dead, nor does he advocate the church baptize for the dead. It's the same as when he was on Mars Hill with the philosophers of the day, and he was arguing with the Stoics of the day, and they were so superstitious that they had all these different gods, and then they had one. They were so afraid they'd miss a god that they even had a shrine to the unknown God. So Paul started there.
On behalf of everyone at Grace Christian Assembly, we thank you for listening to this week's Salvation by Grace message. Remember to visit us on the internet at www.salvationbygrace.org. And we invite you to join us next time when we gather around the Word and study the sovereign grace of God.